I did not even notice it at first. That is the part that still bothers me the most. I was standing in the cold parking lot outside the rental hall, keys in my hand, watching my breath fog up the air, thinking about how quiet everything felt after a night that had been anything but. Inside, my family was still laughing, voices echoing as they gathered coats and leftovers. I had slipped out early, telling them I wanted to warm up the car. The truth was I needed a minute to myself. New Year's dinners with my family had a way of leaving me drained in a very specific, familiar way. I am Bradley, 32 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life learning how to leave rooms without making a scene. I was halfway through unlocking my phone to start some music when the notification popped up. At first, I thought it was a spam alert or one of those delayed transaction summaries that banks like to send at the worst possible times. The number made me pause. Then it made my stomach drop. Rental fee, catering, service, staff gratuity. It was all there, stacked neatly one after the other, charged to my card. Not a partial amount, not a shared split. Everything. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen. I remember the exact feeling, like the ground under my feet had shifted slightly, not enough to knock me over, but enough that I suddenly did not trust my balance. I scrolled down, refreshing, hoping it was a glitch. It was not. The charges were real, approved, completed. I locked my phone, then unlocked it again, as if that might change something. Inside the hall, my family had spent the entire evening congratulating themselves on what a perfect night it was. My mother had cried during her toast. My father had gone on one of his long, nostalgic speeches about how proud he was of all of us, and my sister had clinked her glass loudly and joked about how nice it was to finally do something classy for once. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. I always do. If you had asked anyone at that table, they would have told you I was doing well. They liked to say it out loud, especially when other relatives were around. Bradley's doing great. Bradley figured it out. Bradley's the responsible one. It was never said with malice, exactly, but it was never neutral either. It came with an expectation, a subtle shifting of weight in my direction whenever something needed covering, fixing, smoothing over. Growing up, my sister and I had very different roles. She was louder, quicker to speak, quicker to complain, and somehow always the center of gravity in the room. If she was upset, everyone knew. If I was uncomfortable, it usually stayed that way quietly. When we were kids, she borrowed my things without asking. When we were teenagers, she borrowed my time. As adults, she borrowed assumptions. The assumption that I would handle it. The assumption that I would not say no. The assumption that it would be fine. The New Year's dinner had been her idea. At least, that is how it was framed. A group chat message weeks earlier, full of excitement and exclamation points, suggesting we do something special this year. A rented space, a catered meal, no stress for anyone. Everyone chimed in with approval. When the question of logistics came up, it was vague. We will figure it out. We can split it. We will see what it costs. I remember typing, "Let me know what you need from me," and then immediately regretting how open-ended that sounded. At the dinner itself, nothing felt off until it suddenly did. There were small comments that I brushed past without thinking too hard. My sister joking that I probably got a better deal on my car insurance. My aunt laughing and saying I was the rich one now. My mother telling a story about how, even as a kid, I always had my act together. It was all wrapped in smiles, in warmth, in celebration. That is how it always is. Standing alone in the parking lot, phone heavy in my hand, those comments replayed themselves with new clarity. I walked back inside, my steps slower than before, and found my sister near the dessert table, scrolling through her own phone, looking relaxed, satisfied. I asked her if she had a second. She looked up and smiled like nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. When I showed her the charges, her expression barely changed. She glanced at the screen, shrugged, and said, "Oh, yeah, we figured it would just go on your card." That word did a lot of work in my family. I asked her what she meant by that. She sighed, the way people do when they think you are being difficult on purpose, and said, "You make more than us, Brad." It made sense. We'll sort it out later. Later. Another word that carried a history. I told her, calmly, that no one had asked me. She laughed a little, not unkindly, but not apologetic either. "You always stress about this stuff. It's New Year's. Don't make it weird." Inside, something tightened. Not anger yet. Something closer to clarity. I looked around the room, at my parents packing up leftovers, at relatives hugging goodbye, completely unaware that a quiet line had just been crossed. I nodded. I said nothing else. I walked back to my car, sat down, and closed the door. The music never came on. Instead, I typed a message I had never sent before, not like this, not so directly. I read it twice before hitting send. "And you'll be paying this back," I wrote, "or explaining it legally." The three dots appeared almost immediately. Then they disappeared. Then my phone buzzed again, and again, and again. I did not open any of it. I stared out through the windshield as people began to filter into the parking lot, laughing, waving, unaware that the night had just changed shape. I drove home in silence, knowing, with a certainty that settled deep in my chest, that this was no longer about a dinner bill. Something had shifted, and whatever came next was not going to be quiet. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone was vibrating so often it felt alive. I still did not look at it. I sat there for a full minute with the engine running, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the dark outline of my house. I remember thinking that it was strange how calm I felt. Not peaceful, just steady, like something inside me had finally stopped wobbling. I went inside, took off my coat, and set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I poured a glass of water and drank it slowly, as if I were trying to prove to myself that I was not shaking. The buzzing continued. When it finally stopped, the silence felt heavier than the noise had. I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my brain replayed the evening with new subtitles layered on top. Little moments I had ignored suddenly stood out. The way my sister had waved off the cost when someone asked. The way my mother had smiled at me during her toast, holding my gaze just a second longer than necessary. The way no one had mentioned splitting anything, not once, not even as a joke. By morning, the messages had multiplied. I scrolled through them while making coffee, my stomach tightening with each one. My sister's tone shifted quickly from casual to annoyed, then defensive, then offended. My mother chimed in next, asking why I was starting drama and reminding me that it was a family celebration. My father's message was shorter, more disappointed than angry. He said I should have brought it up privately instead of threatening anyone. That word again. Threatening. I responded carefully. I explained that I had not agreed to pay for everything, that my card had been used without my consent, that this was not about money so much as respect. I tried to keep it calm, factual, almost professional. I thought if I was reasonable enough, it would stay reasonable. It did not. Within an hour, the conversation shifted from the group chat to individual messages, as if everyone wanted their own version of me to argue with. My sister accused me of ruining the holiday. My mother asked if I really wanted to do this over money. My aunt suggested I should be grateful I could afford it. No one asked how I felt. No one acknowledged the shock of seeing my card charged without warning. It was as if the problem was not what had happened, but that I had noticed. Over the next few days, the pattern became clear. Any time I tried to explain my side, it was reframed as selfishness. Any boundary I attempted to set was labeled overreaction. My sister, especially, seemed to take my refusal personally, as if I had broken an unspoken contract we had all signed years ago. She called me on the third day, her voice sharp from the start. She told me I was embarrassing her, that people were talking, that our parents were stressed, that she could not believe I would do this to her after everything she had planned. When I reminded her that she had not asked me before charging my card, she went quiet for a moment, then said something that still rings in my ears. "You always act like you're better than us," she said. "Like your money isn't ours too." Ours too. That was the moment I realized how long this had been going on. Not just the money, but the assumption behind it. That my success was a shared resource. That my comfort existed to offset their inconvenience. That my role in the family was not equal, but functional. The following weekend, my parents invited me over to talk things through. I almost did not go. Something in me knew it would not be a conversation so much as a correction. But a larger part of me, the part that still hoped for fairness, still wanted to believe that if I showed up calmly enough, things could be fixed. I arrived to find my sister already there, sitting at the kitchen table like she belonged at the head of it. My mother busied herself with coffee, avoiding my eyes. My father gestured for me to sit. The air felt thick, like everyone had rehearsed except me. They started gently. That was the strategy. My mother said she understood both sides. My father said families sometimes make mistakes. My sister sat silently, arms crossed, waiting. Then the tone shifted. My father said something about how I had always been the strong one, how they had leaned on me because they knew I could handle it. My mother added that my sister had been under a lot of stress planning the dinner, that she had not meant any harm. When I pointed out that intent did not erase impact, my sister laughed softly and said I was being dramatic. That word again. The conversation circled like that for nearly an hour. Every time I tried to bring it back to the actual issue, it drifted toward my attitude, my delivery, my supposed lack of generosity. At one point, my mother said, "If you really needed the money, we could help." And I had to physically bite back a response. I told them, again, that this was not about whether I could afford it, that it was about being asked, that it was about consent, that it was about trust. My sister finally spoke then, leaning forward, eyes bright with something that looked a lot like triumph. "You know what?" she said. "Maybe we just assumed because you've always covered things before." Always. I thought about birthdays where I had paid for dinner without complaint, about emergencies where I had stepped in quietly, about loans that were never repaid but never mentioned again, about how saying no had never felt like an option, only a failure. I told them I expected to be paid back. Not immediately, but formally. I said I wanted it acknowledged, documented, and agreed upon. The room went very still. My sister's face hardened. My mother's mouth tightened. My father looked at me like I had just said something deeply inappropriate. "You would really make this official?" my mother asked. "Between family?" Something snapped then. Not loudly, not violently, just cleanly. I realized they were not hearing me. They were hearing an inconvenience. My sister stood up, pacing slightly, and said, "I can't believe you'd put us in this position. Do you know how this looks?" That was when the betrayal finally landed, sharp and undeniable. My father cleared his throat and said, carefully, that they had already talked about it, that they had decided the best solution was for me to let it go, that it would be easier for everyone, that I should think of it as my contribution. I asked him what he meant by they. He hesitated, then admitted that they had discussed it without me, that they had agreed I would not push this further, that it was settled. Settled. I felt something cold spread through my chest. Not rage, not hurt, something quieter and far more dangerous. I realized, in that moment, that my role had already been decided for me, and my consent had never been part of the equation. I stood up slowly, every movement deliberate. I told them I needed some air. No one tried to stop me. As I walked toward the door, my sister said, almost casually, "You'll calm down. You always do." I stepped outside into the cold afternoon, my breath visible again, just like it had been in that parking lot days earlier. I stood there, phone in my pocket, heart steady, and understood that this was no longer about a dinner or even about money. They had made a choice without me. And now, so would I? I drove away from my parents' house without a destination in mind. That sounds dramatic, but it was not. It was quiet, almost mechanical. I took familiar roads, past places I had driven by 1,000 times, and felt strangely disconnected from all of it, like I was watching someone else's life through a windshield. For the first time since the dinner, I let myself feel it. Not just the anger, but the weight of everything underneath it. The years of being the reliable one. The unspoken expectation that my stability existed to absorb everyone else's chaos. The realization that when it came down to it, my voice carried less weight than my usefulness. I parked in an empty lot near a park I used to visit when I was younger. It was winter quiet, bare trees and frozen grass, the kind of place where sound travels farther than you expect. I sat there with the engine off, phone in my lap, staring at the screen without unlocking it. I thought about all the times I had convinced myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as being respected. That being needed meant being valued. That illusion finally cracked. The next few weeks were rough in a way I had not anticipated. Not because of loud arguments or dramatic confrontations, but because of absence. The group chat went silent. Invitations stopped. Casual check-ins vanished. When my family did reach out, it was stiff, transactional, like they were talking to a distant relative instead of a son or brother. I was no longer the emotional buffer, and without that role, there seemed to be very little space left for me. At first, I blamed myself. I replayed conversations, wondering if I should have phrased things differently, softened my tone more, waited longer. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my chest tight with a familiar, old guilt, the kind that whispers that maybe you are the problem after all. Work did not help much at first. I went through the motions, answered emails, sat in meetings, nodded at the right moments. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, I felt hollowed out. Like something essential had been scooped away, leaving a shape that everything else rattled around in. The lowest point came quietly. One evening, I opened my banking app, not to check the balance, but to look at the charge again. I do not know why I did it. Maybe I needed proof that it had really happened, that I had not imagined the betrayal. Seeing it there, still unresolved, something inside me finally gave way. I did not cry. I laughed. A short, breathless sound that surprised me. The absurdity of it all hit at once. How carefully I had built my life to avoid conflict, only to end up here anyway. How much energy I had spent managing other people's comfort, only to be told it was expected. That night, I made a decision that scared me more than any argument ever had. I stopped explaining myself. I did not announce it. I did not send a message. I simply stopped. When my mother texted asking if I was still upset, I replied politely and briefly. When my sister sent a long message about how hurt she was, I acknowledged it without apologizing. When relatives hinted that I should be the bigger person, I let the messages sit unanswered. The silence was uncomfortable at first. It felt wrong, like I was breaking some fundamental rule of who I was supposed to be. But slowly, something unexpected happened. The silence created space. With that space came clarity. I started noticing how much mental energy I had been spending anticipating everyone else's reactions. How often I filtered my words before speaking. How rarely I asked myself what I actually wanted. Without the constant pull of family expectations, I felt unmoored, but also strangely light. I threw myself into work, not as an escape, but as something solid to hold on to. I took on projects I had been putting off, volunteered for responsibilities I knew I could handle, but had previously avoided because they would require more of me. I focused. I produced. For the first time in a long while, my effort felt like it was going somewhere instead of being siphoned off. Around that time, an opportunity came up that I would have normally declined. A colleague mentioned a side venture they were starting, something that would require time, investment, and risk. Olmi would have said no, citing family obligations, holidays, the need to stay flexible. This time, I said yes. The work was demanding. It forced me to learn new skills, to make decisions without checking with anyone else, to take responsibility for outcomes that were entirely my own. It was exhausting in the best possible way. When I collapsed into bed at night, it was from effort, not emotional fatigue. As weeks turned into months, I noticed subtle changes. I stood a little straighter. I hesitated less before speaking. I stopped volunteering information that no one had asked for. When people assumed things about my time or resources, I corrected them calmly. The world did not end. My family, on the other hand, did not adjust well to my absence. I heard about it indirectly. A cousin mentioned that my sister was stressed. An aunt hinted that my parents were worried. No one said it outright, but the implication was clear. Things were harder without me smoothing the edges. For the first time, I let that be their experience. I still had moments of doubt. There were holidays I spent alone, evenings where the quiet felt heavier than I wanted it to. I missed the version of my family I thought I had. I grieved it, privately, without trying to fix it. One afternoon, while reviewing documents for the side venture, I realized something that stopped me cold. I felt proud. Not relieved. Not validated. Proud. Of myself. Of the boundaries I had held. Of the discomfort I had survived without retreating into old patterns. That pride did not make the pain disappear, but it changed my relationship to it. It turned the narrative from loss to transformation. From rejection to recalibration. The money issue remained unresolved. It hovered in the background like an unfinished sentence. Occasionally, my sister would test the waters, sending a message that danced around the topic without addressing it directly. My parents avoided it entirely. The unspoken expectation lingered that I would eventually cave. That time would soften my stance. What they did not know was that time had done the opposite. I began documenting everything. Quietly. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Dates. Messages. Charges. Agreements that were never actually agreed upon. I consulted professionals, not to take action yet, but to understand my options. Knowledge felt empowering in a way I had not expected. As my confidence grew, so did my awareness of how precarious my family's assumptions had always been. They had built their comfort on the belief that I would always be there, always absorb the cost, always prioritize harmony over honesty. They had never considered what would happen if I stopped. I did not feel vengeful. I felt prepared. The rise was not dramatic. There was no sudden vindication, no apology that healed everything. It was internal, incremental, built on choices made day after day. Choices to respect myself. Choices to let discomfort exist without rushing to eliminate it. Choices to see my worth as inherent, not conditional. One evening, months after that New Year's dinner, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice sounded tired, careful. He said they needed to talk, that things had gotten complicated, that maybe they should revisit the situation. I looked at the phone for a long moment after the call ended, my reflection faint in the dark screen. I felt steady again, like I had in that parking lot, but this time with purpose layered on top. Whatever conversation was coming next, I knew one thing for certain. I would not be walking into it the same man I had been before. I did not call my father back right away. That was deliberate. Old me would have responded within minutes, anxious to smooth things over, eager to show I was still reachable, still reasonable. This time, I let the phone sit on the counter while I finished what I was doing. I cleaned the kitchen. I reviewed a document for work. I went for a walk. By the time I finally returned the call later that evening, my breathing was slow and even, and my thoughts were clear. He sounded relieved when I answered, which told me more than his words ever could. He said there had been misunderstandings, that tensions had gotten high, that maybe everyone had said things they did not mean. He did not apologize. He did not mention the money. Instead, he suggested we meet, just the two of us, to talk things through like adults. I agreed, not because I believed him, but because I understood something now that I had not before. Conversations like this were never about resolution. They were about leverage. We met at a quiet cafe near his house, the kind of place he liked because it made him feel calm and in control. He arrived early. I noticed that immediately. When I sat down across from him, he studied my face as if searching for signs of softness, of fatigue, of the old Bradley he expected to find. He did not find him. He spoke for a long time, carefully, methodically. He talked about family unity, about how hard things had been lately, about how my sister was struggling more than she let on. He framed the entire situation as unfortunate timing, unfortunate communication, unfortunate emotions. At no point did he acknowledge that my card had been charged without my consent. At no point did he ask how that had made me feel. When there was a pause, I filled it calmly. I told him I was willing to discuss repayment, formally. I told him I expected accountability. I told him I was no longer interested in vague assurances or emotional bargaining. His jaw tightened slightly at that. It was a small thing, but I noticed. He asked me what I meant by formally. I told him I meant clearly, in writing, with expectations and timelines. He leaned back then, sighing, as if I had disappointed him in some fundamental way. "You're turning this into something it doesn't need to be," he said. That was the moment I knew the conversation had reached its limit. I nodded, paid for my coffee, and stood up. I told him I would send a summary of my expectations later. He did not stop me as I left. On the drive home, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Not satisfaction, not excitement, clarity. They were not going to do the right thing unless it was the easiest option available to them. That meant I had to make every other option uncomfortable. The preparation began quietly. I reviewed everything again, this time not as a hurt son or brother, but as a neutral third party. The charge history, the messages, the timeline. I organized it all, not obsessively, but carefully. I created a clear narrative, supported by facts. I did not exaggerate. I did not editorialize. I let the truth speak plainly. I reached out to a few people I trusted, not for validation, but for perspective. Friends who knew my family dynamic. Colleagues who understood contracts and boundaries. I asked questions. I listened. I took notes. The more I learned, the more confident I became that I had been reasonable all along. At the same time, I continued building my own life with intention. The side venture grew steadily, demanding more of my attention but also rewarding it. I expanded my professional network, not aggressively, but thoughtfully. I reconnected with people I had lost touch with, people who saw me as more than a role in a family system. My sister, sensing the shift, began reaching out more frequently. Her messages were inconsistent in tone, sometimes conciliatory, sometimes sharp, sometimes passive-aggressive. She asked if we could put this behind us. She said she missed how things used to be. She hinted that our parents were having a hard time. I responded politely, consistently, and without yielding ground. I reiterated my expectations. I refused to argue about the past. I focused on the present and the future. Each exchange reinforced something important. She was not used to me being unmoved. Then came the opportunity. It arrived in the form of an invitation. A family gathering, framed as a chance to reset, to start fresh. My mother sent the message herself, full of carefully chosen words about forgiveness and togetherness. My sister followed up with a shorter note, saying it would mean a lot to her if I came. I considered declining, but something told me this was not a coincidence. They were not inviting me out of understanding. They were inviting me out of necessity. Whatever pressure they were feeling had reached a point where they needed me present again. So I said yes. In the days leading up to the gathering, I prepared more deliberately than ever. I refined my documentation. I drafted a clear, concise summary of what had happened and what I expected going forward. I consulted one last time, confirming that my approach was sound. I did not plan a confrontation. I planned an outcome. I also set personal boundaries in advance. I decided what I would engage with and what I would not. I decided how I would leave if things crossed a line. I decided, most importantly, that I would not be reactive. The night before the gathering, I slept well. That surprised me. In the past, events like this would have left me restless, anxious, rehearsing conversations in my head. This time, I felt prepared, not armored, grounded. When I arrived at my parents' house the next day, the atmosphere was tense beneath the surface cheer. Smiles lingered a little too long. Voices were a little too bright. My sister hugged me tightly, as if trying to re-establish something by force. I returned the gesture politely, briefly. As the evening unfolded, I observed more than I spoke. I watched how my sister deferred to me in small ways she never had before. I noticed my parents glancing at me, gauging my mood. The balance had shifted, and everyone felt it. At one point, my mother suggested we all sit down together to talk. She said it casually, but her hands were shaking slightly as she cleared the table. My sister nodded quickly. My father looked tired. We gathered in the living room, the same room where so many decisions had been made without me. I sat down, my posture relaxed, my mind focused. I listened as they spoke, as they framed the situation again, softer this time, more cautious. When there was a pause, I reached into my bag. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply laid out the facts, one by one, calmly and clearly. I explained what had happened, why it was not acceptable, and what I expected to happen next. I told them this was not negotiable, but it was resolvable. The room went very quiet. My sister stared at the papers as if seeing them for the first time. My parents exchanged looks. I could feel the weight of the moment settling in, the realization that this was not something they could talk their way out of. I had not come to argue. I had come prepared. And as I sat there, watching their expressions shift from confidence to uncertainty, I knew that whatever happened next would finally be on my terms. The silence in the living room stretched longer than anyone expected it to. I let it. I sat back, hands folded loosely in my lap, breathing steady. For once, I was not filling the space. I was not rescuing anyone from discomfort. I was letting the truth sit where it belonged. My father was the first to speak. His voice sounded different than I remembered it, lower, edged with something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. He asked if I was really serious about this. Not angry, not accusatory, just careful. I told him yes. My sister laughed then, a sharp, brittle sound that cracked halfway through. She said I was being dramatic again, that this was excessive, that no one else would do this to family. I looked at her calmly and said, "No one else would do this to me either." That landed harder than anything else I could have said. My mother tried to intervene, tears already gathering in her eyes, talking about how she never wanted money to come between us. I told her gently that money already had, long before I ever said a word about it. That the difference was I had finally stopped pretending it was not happening. I walked them through everything. Slowly, clearly. I explained how my card had been charged without my consent. I explained how the decision to settle it had been made without me. I explained how that was not a misunderstanding, but a choice. I made it impossible to reframe, because I refused to let emotion replace facts. Then I told them what would happen next. I said the amount would be repaid in full, according to a schedule I had already outlined. I said it would be documented. I said that if the terms were violated, I would proceed formally, without discussion or warning. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten. I stated it the way you state the weather. My sister stood up, furious now, pacing the room like she had months earlier, except this time there was no confidence in it. She accused me of humiliating her, of trying to punish her, of holding money over everyone's head. I let her finish. Then I said, evenly, that accountability only feels like punishment when you have never had to face it before. That was when the fight drained out of her. I watched it happen in real time. Her shoulders sagged. Her voice dropped. She looked at our parents, expecting rescue. It did not come. My father rubbed his temples, the way he does when he realizes something has gone further than he intended. My mother stared at the floor. In that moment, I saw something clearly that I had never let myself see before. They had relied on me not pushing back. They had built a system around my silence. And now that the system was failing, there was no backup plan. After a long pause, my father nodded. Just once. He said they would repay it, that they would make it right. He did not apologize, not fully, but there was something like defeat in his tone. Acceptance, maybe. I thanked him. Not warmly, not coldly, just appropriately. The fallout did not happen all at once. It came in waves. The first payment arrived exactly on time. Then the second, then the third. Each one felt less like vindication and more like closure. I did not celebrate them. I simply marked them off. My sister barely spoke to me during that time. When she did, it was stiff, guarded. She no longer joked about my income. She no longer assumed. The dynamic had changed, and she felt it. I think part of her resented me for it. Another part, quieter, seemed to realize that she had misjudged me completely. My parents struggled more. They oscillated between trying to return to normal and carefully avoiding anything that might trigger another boundary. We spoke less, but when we did, the conversations were cleaner. No guilt, no manipulation, just surface-level, respectful distance. Extended family found out eventually. Stories always travel. Some people reached out to tell me I had done the right thing. Others hinted that I had gone too far. I listened without defending myself. Their opinions no longer held the power they once did. What surprised me most was how little satisfaction I felt from being proven right. The real reward had come earlier, quietly, when I stopped needing approval from people who benefited from my self-doubt. The side venture continued to grow. What had started as a risk became something solid, then something successful. I negotiated contracts confidently. I said no when something did not serve me. I said yes when it did. The skills I had learned navigating my family translated cleanly into every other area of my life. Months later, my sister asked to meet for coffee. Just the two of us. She looked smaller somehow, less certain. She apologized, awkwardly, for how things had been handled. It was not perfect. It was not poetic. But it was real. I accepted it without reopening old wounds. Forgiveness, I had learned, did not require amnesia. We are not close now. We are civil. And that is enough. My parents never fully acknowledged the favoritism. They did not need to. Their behavior shifted permanently. Boundaries do that. They rewrite expectations without requiring agreement. The final payment came through on a quiet Tuesday morning. I saw the notification while sitting at my desk, sunlight slanting across the room. I closed the banking app and leaned back in my chair, feeling something settle deep in my chest. Not triumph. Not revenge in the dramatic sense. Peace. Later that day, my father called. He said he hoped we could move forward now, that he wanted things to be like they used to be. I told him calmly that things would never be like they used to be, but they could be better if everyone respected where the lines were now. He did not argue. That night, I went for a walk, hands in my pockets, breathing in the cool air. I thought back to that parking lot after New Year's dinner, the shock, the disbelief, the moment everything cracked open. I realized something then that I wish I had understood years earlier. Standing up for myself had not cost me my family. It had simply revealed who they were when I finally stopped paying to belong.